So good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. My name is Michael Kerr. I'm the Business Development Manager at RSK Ireland. We realise it's end of month and it's Cyber Monday, so we appreciate the time you've taken to join us this morning. Just before we get into the main presentation, I want to just talk through some housekeeping arrangements, just so that you're familiar with the format. Everybody joins the meeting today on a mute mode. So from the point of view of you won't be able to speak to us, but there is a chat function that you'll be able to put your questions and answers to the panel in. So feel free to pop those into the panel. Then we will also be running a poll today as well. So from the point of view of there's a question that we're going to ask the audience. It's just a binary answer, yes or no, and we just want to get some reaction from how everybody's feeling. We're also going to be sending a survey out after the seminar today, just to get your feelings on how we've done it. Since COVID has affected everybody this year, we don't get as many face-to-face seminar opportunities. So the webinars have been a tool that we've implemented since the start of the coronavirus, and we want to do more of them if people are interested and are happy with the content. So feel free to give us your comments on the survey afterwards. So today we are going to be discussing just about Ireland's strategy working towards 70% renewable energy by 2030. So the speakers we have today, I've already introduced myself, so thanks again for attending. Mark Dignum is here, who is the Associate Director at Nicholas O'Dwyer, a civil and structural engineering company based in Dublin and Newry. We have Mike Kelly there as Renewables Director from RSK Group, and we have Nicola McGlynn from Can Renewables. Nicola's going to be talking a little bit about maintenance and operation and maintenance of wind farms and solar farms. So basically, we're going to just take a slide at the start here to introduce RSK to anybody who doesn't really know us that well. We're going to have a little bit of a look at the Irish market in terms of renewable energy. We're going to talk about some of the services we have available to help the industry and some innovation that's going on within RSK Group. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've been involved with as well. So during the presentation, myself and the rest of the speakers, we're going to just mute our cameras now so that you can focus on the presentation and you don't have to particularly look at me. I'm going to invite everybody just to switch their cameras off, and we'll get the presentation started. So we expect it to be moving at a relative amount of pace because we've got a lot of content to get into a very small space of time. So RSK Group, we are an engineering and environmental consultancy company. Now, over the course of the last 30 years, you can see by the graph here, we have enjoyed some organic growth over the first 25 years of the company history. But particularly in the last 5 years, you can see the trend that really we're seeing a lot of growth, and that is because the company is going through an acquisition strategy. Now, that acquisition strategy is not about buying up the market, it's about extending the range of services that we can offer to the market. And we're going to explain some of these companies that have joined RSK Group. Mark Dignum works for Nicholas O'Dwyer. They joined the group earlier this year, so that brought a lot of civil and structural engineering expertise into the group to balance up some of the other specialties that we have. So as the presentation goes on, you'll find out a little bit more about what we do. But in terms of how we actually approach the renewable energy market, we tried to look at the market from a holistic approach. So what we really mean by that is that we're looking at what the projects actually need. We're not just looking at individual services. We try to introduce other ideas and innovation to help onshore and offshore wind projects, solar projects. It could be hydropower, it could be battery storage, it could be hydrogen, and other things like biogas and biomass. So we have experience in all these throughout, not just RSK Ireland and Nicholas O'Dwyer, but also throughout the RSK Group. And really what we try to look at is this cradle to grave approach. So when you look at some of the services that we have listed here, we're not going to read through them all, but there are different types of services that are needed in that initial stage when clients and developers are trying to identify suitable sites for renewable power. They're trying to negotiate land agreements. They're trying to look at the feasibility. How can we maximize either solar or wind capacity on particular sites? And then you move from there into the planning stage and getting prepared for, submitting a planning application. And there are a range of technical surveys needed there, anything from archaeology to ecology to site investigations, geotechnical surveys. And we've got a wide range of product offerings there as well. Then you move into the construction phase of every development, and again, RSK are there to offer services on the ground. It could be, from Nicholas O'Dwyer's point of view, it could be owner engineer services. It could be, specialist advice as things develop on a site. It could be ecological or environmental monitoring on a site as it's being developed. Once the site or the asset is up and running, it obviously has to be looked after. So there are, within whatever planning constraints have been set by that site, there may be, certain things that have to be adhered to in terms of ecological monitoring. It could be, we have to look at the hydrology of the site and make sure that there aren't, ongoing flood risks. But there also could be things like damage to wind turbines or solar panels. And Nicola's going to pick that up in her presentation later on about how, can renewables can offer something there. And then the last part of the process is where assets are being decommissioned and sites have to be restored back to their former condition. RSK can offer a range of services in that. So we're just going to take the first opportunity to ask a question of the audience here. So we've got a poll that we're going to ask, and really all you need to do is click yes or no on the answer, and we'll give you about 20 seconds to put your answer into the chat box. So the question is, do you think procuring services on an individual basis is better value for money than procuring a multidisciplinary package? So I realize that the audience today, there are a range of experiences out there. Everybody will have their own opinion, their own personal experience of this. So we just want to get a bit of an idea from the audience, what your feeling is on that. Is it better to buy all the individual specialist services individually, or is it better to go out and just put one tender or one procurement exercise into the market to get a price for that? So just about another 10 seconds if you want to get your answers in, and then we'll have a quick look at the answers. So yes, Jane, can we see the answers there, please? So nearly, I'm going to say nearly half and half, but really nearly a 40-60 split there. So everybody's, we can see there is a balance of experience there and a balance of opinion. So really 43% say it is better value, 57% say no. And obviously there are reasons for that, and we're going to look into some of that as well. So moving on, the model that RSK tries to look at when we're looking at renewable energy projects is like an integrated model. So it's not single supplier in a pure form where one company does all the work. So RSK have a group of companies here, all specializing in different aspects that may be needed for a renewable energy project. And what we've seen in our experience is, particularly where there's a time-bound aspect to it, if you are individually procuring every individual consultant you need on a large renewable energy project, that's a lot of time. So time lost can mean cost. And then the other thing that you have to be careful about is procuring individual packages. You have to come up with a scope of services, and then that can be a barrier to a client or a supplier coming in with innovation, because they're only tendering for what's on the page. So unless there's something built into that procurement exercise to allow them to innovate and bring new ideas, you're only going to get a very, very fixed set of services. Managing multiple reports from multiple suppliers has the potential to create conflicts. So by using a single supplier model to integrate all those into a final solution, it can remove the client from the conflict and let all those conversations happen within the group of companies, and then they come back with one integrated solution. And then if you're working with that, through a third party to actually integrate that together, that could be additional fees. So we feel that a single supplier model can produce a better integrated approach and release some economies of scale and simplifies the communication channels for the client. To put this all in context, just to look at the market, where this idea of 70% by 2030, Northern Ireland has been performing, you can see there from the stats, by June of this year, they were sitting around 48% of renewable energy generation within Northern Ireland. So to get to 70% by 2030, that's about 2.5% additional capacity needs to be created every year. there's a paper released on Friday there about 80% by 2030 for Northern Ireland. That adds another % a year to get to that target. Comparison, the Republic of Ireland, we are sitting in a situation where, now these figures came from the Climate Action Plan in 2019, but you're sitting just below 40%. So that still allows, a 30% lift based on 2019 figures in a 10-year period, which is again a sizable amount of energy capacity being brought into the grid. And that's in light of additional electrification and moving to electric vehicles and additional electricity demand. And the other thing that we're noticing within the industry is that projects are becoming more complex. The locations are becoming more remote and harder to access. Offshore wind produces a new set of logistics, and then floating offshore wind is a new set of technology on top of more complicated logistics. We're starting to see more hybrid models, and that is as a result of giving flexibility to the generation. Dispatch down, curtailment has meant that some wind and solar assets have to actually turn off or reduce output. So the introduction of battery and hydrogen generation can give an opportunity to continue to generate electricity, but maybe convert it into either storage or into another product that can be used. And then, what's being proposed is hydrogen connection into the gas grid. Complicating that further, our customers are becoming different. We have more prosumers, so people who produce electricity and use it themselves. We're seeing community power introduced into the island as well on a much wider scale. So these are different types of customers with different levels of technical knowledge. And then we see technological improvements changing mid-project, so possibly a higher output PV panel is introduced into the market, and it's not what you had originally designed the site around. So is there adaptability in the design and adaptability in the construction process to bring that new technology in mid-construction? 2020 seen the first RES auction produced in Ireland. So we seen 63 solar projects get an offer and 19 onshore wind projects. So you can see the distribution of those around the country. Question is, will they all complete? These projects are sitting with an offer on the table, and really what the key is to completing these projects is suitable finance availability, a streamlined planning process, being able to get access to the grid in the right timeframes, but also from what we see from the engineering and environmental side, is there enough technical skills for project delivery at all stages through that cradle to grave concept? And also strong project planning and management skills are needed in there as well. We're expecting a consultation in January 2021 for RES 2 with probably an auction coming out mid next year, mid 2021. So that will bring even more projects possibly into the design and planning stage. But is 70% by 2030 achievable? We feel it is. And the argument coming from industry is that there are things that needed to happen. Government policy, which we're seeing all the right signals coming from both the Irish and the British governments. Planning reform, there is a plan in place. And then the grid connections. And the grid knows they have to step up to the environment, the challenge. But at the same side, you've got to see some innovation coming in there. We've got to see some solutions being engineered within the site constraints that we're building on. But we also need good quality baseline information to inform the design. And just on that, the surveys and on that, we would always recommend as your first lesson there is to consider what information you need very, very early in the project, and think about designing that into your survey plan. So rather than just sending somebody out to do an ecological survey, think about how that information is going to be used throughout the lifetime of the project. And by commissioning maybe a better quality set of information at the very, very start, that can help the project at various stages along. The same goes for site investigation data, geotechnical data, hydrogeological data. If you commission the right kind of information at the very, very start, that can be used at multiple stages through the project. But if you go cheap and cheerful at the start, it doesn't give you all the information you need to come up with a proper solution. So within our SK group, I just want to highlight some of the innovation that we're doing within the company. So Central Alliance is an RSK company. They have generated a satellite-based solution to identify landslide risk by identifying water saturation points in sites. So when you've got an asset actually on site, whether that be a wind turbine or a solar farm, or it could just be energy infrastructure like pylons or substations, that technology can be used to identify potential landslide problems, and we've seen an issue with that in Donegal in the last 2 weeks. The air quality team at RSK can offer, specialist advice on air dispersion modeling if somebody's considering a biogas plant. We have a companies CBEX and Salix within the group that offer organic solutions for erosion control along riverbanks. So again, if you have a technology asset very close to a waterway, and the waterway through flooding and climate change is eroding, they can come in and put riverbank restoration solutions in there, but in an organic and in a biodiversity friendly way. Speaking about biodiversity, we've got RSK Wilding that was established this year by RSK to help with habitat restoration, relocation of species to areas where they can, prosper and flourish, and repopulation schemes. So this is to go side by side with the developers to help them, tackle that biodiversity challenge on their developments. One aspect of the electrification of heat and the reduction of carbon emissions is looking at things like ground source heat pumps. We have a company, Ground Heat, within the group as well that looks at that. 600,000 buildings in the island of Ireland need retrofitted in the next 20 years. 26 million buildings across the UK need retrofitted in the next 20 years. So that, goes hand in hand with insulation and, reducing drafts and reducing heat demand. And then bringing RSK's experience in there of remediation. Looking at the history of RSK, we were formally established as a contamination expert now for the oil and gas sector. That is now number 5 in our list of customers, is that sector, because the nature of our business has changed so much. So using that experience we have in remediation in oil and gas to bring it to the renewable energy sector adds another valuable tool in the toolbox. Want to highlight something else about, because we do so much work on brownfield sites, we see the potential there as brownfield sites being developed as renewable asset locations. Now, this is just an example. We have a gentleman within our group that joined us this year, Ferenc Kiss. Now, I know he's listening today, so I'm just going to drop his name in there. But Ferenc gave us an idea of something that he had seen in Europe, where they took an old landfill in Austria, and because of the nature of landfills, it was going to be a bad idea to start piling rigs in to, it was going to perforate the membrane, it might let gas out, and it's not something you could do to put a solar array in. So one solution in Europe they came up with was using precast blocks to mount the solar array. So it meant the brownfield site, which is a landfill, could still be used as a renewable location, but without the intrusive nature of going into the ground. So it may be a good use of brownfield sites in the future. And that is something we need to look at, because the continual use of greenfield sites for development is going against, to a certain extent, the biodiversity challenge. So before I hand over to Mark and Nicola, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of projects that RSK Ireland have been involved in. The first one was an ecology assignment that we started last year for a client located in Wexford. It was an existing wind farm, but the proposal was they were considering extending the life extension of the site. And what you find with the planning permission for a lot of these sites, they are generally 20, 25 years. But what happens if your asset is actually, performing well and well maintained? You want it to prolong that. So before you can apply for your planning permission, further ecological studies had to be done. So you can see from the slide there, we've got quite a range of things to do. We've, multidisciplinary ecological studies to do. We've got to do winter surveys. We've got to do breeding seasons, birds, bats, terrestrial ecology. So that's the animals that are on the ground, not flying. We have to create a chapter, a biodiversity chapter for the EIR. We've got to do an appropriate assessment report, and we've also got to produce a habitat remediation plan. One of the big challenges in this was we were awarded the contract very close to the start of the survey season, so we needed to respond very quickly on that. And probably the lessons learned in that is that, you know, ecology is a multidisciplinary discipline. So one person can't do the birds, the bees, the bats, the badgers, and the aquatic and the marine. That's a very unique person if you can find them. So you need to have assets and subcontractors and associates at your disposal. So what helps there is pre-screening those people in advance before you need them, so you can mobilize at short notice. And in that particular job, we used a subcontractor because we had to get mobilized really, really quickly. And part of that was because of the survey season. So if you miss a critical time in an ecological survey, you could be waiting a whole year before you can do that survey again. And that's a delay in a project that maybe you don't want. RSK has been working on some innovations like eDNA, where they identify a species just by a trace. So a good example of this is the great crested newt. It's something that RSK has worked with across the UK, where they take water samples and they can identify the newt DNA in the water without actually seeing the newts. And that's really, really good technology to have, but it's actually no use if you haven't brought on board Planola and the planning service with you to say this is a recognized technique. So bringing those innovations in are good, but you've got to bring the people that matter in with you as well. And a couple of other things there, site observations will not always necessarily match what you see on a desktop survey. So you've got to go to site. You know, ecological surveys, you've got to have somebody do a walk through the site. We had a case recently where we were doing a single turbine ecological assessment, and anecdotal evidence was, yeah, the site is fine. You know, there was nothing on any plans to indicate there was a problem. But when the ecologist went to site, he was talking to a landowner next door, and his plan was to plant trees. Now, as well as creating a wind issue that it could actually shield the potential site from some wind, it also is going to generate ecology aspects over the course of that time. It's going to create an environment for ecology to be. So that is something else that wasn't going to pop up on a desktop survey. The last thing I'm going to mention here is just about another project. James Mangan, our acoustic specialist based in our Dublin office, was on a job in the last 2 years. I think this was based in the Limerick area, but it was after a wind turbine had been commissioned, or wind farm being commissioned, and there were lots of complaints about noise. Now, obviously, you have the WEGS regulations, which are, you know, indicate that the sound parameters that wind farms should work within, and those are set to be reviewed, possibly coming in with stricter guidelines. Now, that is something that obviously the wind turbine manufacturers have to operate within. So they're going to have to create the technology that meets those regulations. But what it turned out to be the problem was James went to site, he took his analysis, he took his reports, and the complaints still kept coming. It's too noisy. So, you know, they went back at night time, did further analysis, still within the constraints for the site. So really what it came down to was what engagement was done with that community at the start, and possibly a false expectation of how quiet or noisy a wind farm would be. And really that was the crux of the issue. It wasn't so much that it was a noise issue, but it was a managing the expectations. What we're seeing now is a lot more people now are more familiar with what a renewable energy development brings to an area. So from that point of view, there's less, if you want to call it, ignorance of what the issues are, but a better informed public sometimes can obviously create other issues as well. So that community engagement is very, very important on a project as well, not just the technical stuff. So at this point, I'm going to pass you over to Mark Dignum from Nicholas O'Dwyer. I'm going to let him talk about some of the experience that Nicholas O'Dwyer and Mark have had. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. First of all, just a excuse me, a reminder to post your questions for the Q&A session at the end. We'll be happy to try and answer your questions as best we can. So I'm Mark Dignum from a company called Nicholas O'Dwyer. I suppose a lot of people would know us as a water sector civil engineering company. But we have quite a long established environmental department as well, and a lot of experience in ecology and environmental services in Ireland. As well as that, we do have quite a lot of engineering experience in civil engineering around wind farm and renewable projects. So some of the examples here are the Mount Lucas and Brocana wind farms that we completed for Bord na Móna as part of design and build projects. So they were 84 megawatt and 42 megawatt respectively, 28 and 14 turbines respectively. We also did the Mount Lucas Visitor Centre and Maintenance Depot on the same project. So not only can we do the civil engineering side of renewable projects, but you know, if you do have a great idea like having a visitor centre on your wind farm, and public acceptance is heading that way, it's a great resource for your local schools and other interested groups to visit. We've also done quite a bit of work on public road improvements, junction design, bridge assessment, and so on, condition surveys. So they are obviously important parts to getting your turbines to site. Over the last, we've done Mount Lucas substation as well. It's a 110 kV substation for that project. But over the last 6 years, we have completed 5 110 kV substations and 1 220 kV substation for ABB and AirGrid. So we have quite a bit of experience on the electrical side as well into what goes into these complex projects. So generally the scope that we cover are access roads and bridges, drainage design, public road junctions, public road improvements, and structural design. So I just wanted to give you an example. This is a typical long section from an access road on the Mount Lucas project. On this project, we use fully 3D design with a software called Civil 3D. So the first thing we did was basically a topo survey of the complete access road network around all the turbines, which is the green line there. We then employed a contractor to carry out very simple Macintosh probes on the access road routes, which is the pink line, and that gives a very quick and simple way of finding out where is the bottom of the peat. These were spent bogs in the Midlands, so they're very thin layers of peat throughout, but there is still quite a bit of peat there in places. And then we matched that to the constraints that we had on site. In this case, we had an existing railway that had to be maintained, and we had a turbine platform just over the other side of this hill. So what we did is we optimized the design using the maximum gradients that we were allowed to achieve from the turbine manufacturer. And very quickly we were able to optimize the amount of excavation and the amount of stone fill that would be needed throughout the project. So there was a lot of optioneering done, a lot of tweaking of things very early on in the design to try and obviously be as efficient as possible. But my challenge to owner developers would be, why not get this type of design done upfront before you go to the market to your design build contractor, and have your specimen design nice and lean, because you have the information, you have the topo survey. Literally 2 weeks work did this 28 turbine site in Mount Lucas to find out the peat level, so it can be done very quickly, and that's something that we can do for you. In terms of drainage, I mean, for wind farms, it tends to be quite simple, but I suppose there's obviously key constraints as well in terms of the amount of outflow that you can have from the site. And by and large, what we tried to do is to utilize the natural features of the sites as much as possible. So in Mount Lucas, we had to widen and deepen some of the drains to make swales, and it proved very successful even in large flood events. And we maintained the outlet weir at the exit of the site, so we held back more rainwater, so that obviously we didn't exceed the allowable outfall rates. So can be done very simply, but there's quite a bit of work goes in at the early stages to make sure that your design is nice and simple and efficient. So that's it for me. I just wanted to share an image with you of a project that we're doing at the moment, which is this image here is a 15 megawatt gas-fired flexible power station in the northeast of England. We're currently doing 2 of these on adjoining sites, so 100 megawatt facility in total. And as civil structural engineers, we look at these projects much as we look at a water treatment plant or a substation, that there's going to be heavy equipment, detailed foundations, lots of inserts, and lots of detailed design, and that's the type of thing that we can take on really for any project. So that's it for me. I'll just pass you over to Nicola from Can Renewables. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. Just quickly to take the time to sort of thank you all for dialing in and giving us your attention. As Michael and Mark have both said, please do post your questions. If I could have my first slide, please. So Can Renewables is, for all intents and purposes, the O&M arm of the RSK Renewables business. We draw on our experience from Can Geotechnical and Structures, which is a 30-year-old business carrying out both work at height and in difficult access, but also on large-scale structures and geotechnical projects. I reference here, we run a multi-brand blade engineering services company, where we work on all types of OEM blades, particularly Siemens, Vestas and LM. For those of you that understand the turbine market, LM supply their blades to Nordex, GE and Senvion turbines. Our experience across both the UK and the EU, we've run projects from £20,000 to £1.5 million, both on and offshore. So all of our blade technicians are qualified to work in both the on and offshore markets. One of the services that we run is sort of drone inspection, UAV inspection, and I'll touch a little bit more on that in a moment. But what we do, unlike any other drone company, is that we utilize skilled blade technicians as well as pilots working in a team together, which gives us a knowledge to fully understand what we're looking at utilizing a drone. We deliver blade repair in terms of categories 1 to 5 damages, but also we can retrofit lightning protection systems and test and retrofit. For those of you that understand the blade market, damages are categorized from 1 to 5, and we also are experienced in delivering a number of OEM warranty cases as well. So we deal with leading edge protection, as you'll all know. One of the fundamental issues in the blade sector at the moment, or in the wind sector in its entirety, is leading edge damage. We work across a number of protection systems, from soft shells to leading edge tape, and also paint on solutions. the blade market, there's a number of what we call vortex generators available, which are add-ons to the blades, which improve the AEP and the aerodynamics in terms of the energy production. We've had experience working on Siemens, Nordex, and Senvion vortex generators. As a company, obviously, we're a difficult access, and we can provide access solutions, also confined space. And we also, at Can Renewables, unlike most blade companies, we run our own wind turbine safety rules. So this gives us the ability to provide an isolation technician within the team of blade technicians, and we can respond to critical damages and emergency response. If I can have the next slide, please. So one of the things we pride ourselves with Can Renewables is our technical ability. Our system is set up that allows us to operate to all our own technical procedures. In many instances, we'll operate to an OEM procedure when it comes to blades. But just to give you an indication, we have a full suite inside our management system of technical procedures. And I won't read through the list here, but I think the point here is that if you are an owner or a manager of wind farms and you have limited access to repair and inspection procedures, we have Can Renewables procedures which all of our blade technicians are trained against, which this also allows us to work with you to provide QA on any damages and advise you of the best route of repair. We use an app reporting system, which is a live app reporting system that all the blade technicians use. This allows us to take visuals and monitor the blade repair process right through from damage assessment through to repair. And this provides you with a detailed report of a step-by-step guide as to how your blades are either being inspected or indeed repaired. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So just touching on the UAV that we use, again, we kind of pride ourselves on the equipment that we're using here. And I touched on really briefly, when we are carrying out blade inspection, we do that with a team that is not only a pilot, but also a blade technician. This gives us the ability on site, if we view anything, it gives us the ability to actually access, isolate the turbine and actually take a closer look at damages if needed. The other thing is that we're shooting through the UAV, obviously live footage, which is then converted into a number of stills, and I'll demonstrate the ability of this in a moment. But more importantly, we're using a system called AVA, and that's an online platform that allows us to build a historical inspection regime for your assets, and it allows any of your engineers to access that system to have full view of all the inspection records that have been taken. We would then take each individual report and categorize repairs and work out a maintenance program for you from, I suppose, surface repairs right through to critical damages. And we would be able to do that with the support of our technical team who are qualified to make that assessment. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is just some images. So if we take these left to right on the screen, we fly a drone only in where a turbine has been isolated. Obviously, we have full risk assessments to allow us to be able to do that. And we would work with the operator or the owner of the wind farm to ensure that we've got the right risk assessments in place. but generally speaking, we would use or fly the UAV between sort of 20 to 30 meter distance from the asset itself. And this is just a very small section of photographs that we've taken from a live footage. And you can see that the camera, which is zooming, enables us to zoom in on the asset. And this is whilst flying live. You can see that the middle image is zooming closer to the tip. And then the image on the far right of the screen is showing you that there's tip damage. This would allow us to make an assessment. You'll find a lot of drone companies that are operating out there at the moment not only have the technical expertise to understand what they're looking at, but the equipment that they're using is not substantial enough to be able to get this closer visual. And we record this, as I said, all the way through AVA, the reporting platform. If I could take the next slide, please. So just a short summary of the experience we have in terms of solar engineering. Really going back to sort of Cannes' roots as a geotechnical company and equally a structural engineering company, we've been able to take that experience with the solar PV sector, and in particular look at feasibility studies and assessments for rooftop designs, that has allowed us in terms of installing to take a look at both ground and rooftop installations. The company RSK itself, we're able as Cannes to provide groundworks, but we have another subsidiary company inside of RSK which has significant experience in the solar sector in terms of looking at ground management and devegetation also. Again, we use exactly the same UAV equipment to carry out thermal imaging in the solar sector, and I'll show you some visuals of that shortly. Operations and maintenance in terms of looking at retrofits and very simple module cleaning. But again, we draw on our experience from rope access engineering to be able to access difficult in terms of looking at solar panels at height and difficult access. So we don't need to scaffold buildings. We would do that through rope access engineering. If I could take the next slide, please. So from a solar perspective, in the same way that we've just looked at the blades, the drone is carrying, as well as a visual camera and recording live footage, the drone also carries radiometric thermal cameras, and all of these are running concurrently with each other. So if you take the first image to the left here, you can see on the second solar array at the bottom, in the middle of one of the squares, you can see what you would appear as bird excrement. And if you look into the second image to the middle image on the slide here, you can see the same visual, but obviously much closer up. So on this same inspection, we're carrying a thermal camera. So when you start to look at the thermal imaging here, what this actually shows you, whilst you might see this visually as bird excrement on a solar panel, actually this solar panel is damaged, and through the thermal image you can see that this particular panel was actually cracked. And this cuts out significant time when doing inspection. In terms of the drone itself, I mean, it's pretty much, we can fly probably square kilometre in about 20 minutes. So that just gives you an indication of the length of time a UAV inspection may take on your array. So that's it from me. Very, very brief, but as we said in the beginning, please do post questions. And I'll
Okay, thank you, Nicola, and thank you to Mark as well. Now, I realise we are at our 45 minutes, but we can take some questions if anybody has them. We have a couple in the waiting room that Mike is going to ask the panel. If I can ask Nicola and Mark and Mike to put your cameras back on. So we can take the questions now. I realise we advertise this as a 45-minute event, so anybody who has to go, we understand that, but we can take a few questions here. So Mike, first question.
Thanks, Michael. Packed in a lot there, so I hope it was very interesting for the audience. Cracking on with the questions, we've got an initial one for Nicola, I'd say, which is, does each make of the turbine have different requirements in terms of blade surfaces?
Yeah, so I mean, I touched on the beginning of the presentation. I mean, it's very brief, and I'll try and answer this quite briefly. Each OEM has manufactured their blades in a different process, so therefore, yes, there are differences in blade types. However, the categorization of blade damage is a global categorization from 1 to 5. We either work to an OEM repair procedure or damage procedure, but as I touched on, we have our own also. So same theory, slight differences depending on OEM type.
Okay, all right, thanks, Nicola. I've got a couple here, for Mark particularly, I think. First one is, how is climate change or climate resilience, factored into flood risk and drainage designs for renewables developments?
Thanks. Well, I guess in general terms, we're obviously adding on increased percentages now into rainfall intensities. I think in the UK it's 40% that's being added on. In Ireland it varies, either 20% or 30%. So that's going to give you higher levels, both flood levels and drainage levels, to deal with. What we've been doing recently as well is future-proofing our flood barriers, embankments, retaining walls, etc., to allow for them to be increased in the future. So obviously you don't want to come back in the future and have to mess with your foundations. If you design your foundations for that future load now, you can come back and just raise your wall on top or raise your embankment on top.
And second one again, Mark, if you don't mind, where does the responsibility lie for turbine foundation design?
In my experience, it varies from project to project. The majority of projects I've worked with, it has been the responsibility of the turbine supplier. So he's brought his own designer with him, who's used to designing foundations for his turbines. But there is a role for us there in terms of third-party checking, and obviously it's the same site investigation information that they'll be using. So naturally, I think the client would want us to review that in tandem.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And one here for you, Michael. Wants to do with community. Is the number of renewable projects increasing and more sites being developed, as we know, true across Ireland and the UK. How important is it, do you think, that communications and stakeholder engagement will be for future planning developments?
Okay, well, I think in the first instance it is crucial. You can't put 20 wind turbines in a field somewhere and expect nobody to have an input to that. So that certainly that there is a need to engage with any stakeholders that may be affected. Now, to be clear, stakeholders are not just neighbours and members of the public. They are, government departments, planning departments. It could be, you've got to keep an eye on obviously the government strategy for things like biodiversity and re-greening spaces and things like that. So it's not just you're worried about a couple of farmers in the area or a couple of neighbours who don't want to hear the noise of wind turbines. And I'm a marketer at heart and in my background, and the one thing that we would see trending in marketing is the influence of social media, particularly when it comes to bad news. You know, you need to be really ahead of that when you're doing your stakeholder engagement, because the first bit of bad news gets out there, then you're in a negative fight for the rest of your development. So before you even engage any consultants on site, you probably need to be thinking about that, about how are we going to make this as attractive as possible for the local area and for all the stakeholders involved. And you really need to do your homework on that. And that's obviously one of these early, you know, pieces of work that you have to do. You have to say who is affected, and you can find very, very small community active groups who are quite intelligent about protecting things like local marine life, protecting, you know, maybe they're the only place in the country that has a specific type of geology, and somebody plans to build a wind turbine there or a solar farm. They say, no, you're going to affect the one thing that brings us 100 international students a year into our local community and sells hotel rooms by sticking a wind turbine on top of this rare piece of rock, or ecology, or, you know, biodiversity, or botany, or whatever it may be. So you really need to do your homework on that, and that needs to be done in that feasibility stage. And really you need to get ahead of the debate before the word gets out there's a potential development there, because you don't want to be in that negative fight. And this is where the innovation comes in as well, is what can we do to enhance that site? What other benefits can we bring to that area along with this development? And I have to say, you know, we are seeing good practice of that at the minute. Mark mentioned, you know, some of the wind projects he had been on before, where they built an education resource centre on site. Those are really, really good incentives, but you need to be thinking of those at the start of the project rather than waiting for the bad press and the publicity to come. And I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Michael. There's one here which I'm kind of asking myself a question here in a way, but there's a question coming out I'm happy to pick up. And it's basically looking at what role do we see co-location technologies, hybrid development taking in the medium to longer term. I think picking up on a point that Michael made earlier, you know, hybridization, co-location of technologies is on the increase. You know, you're looking at sort of pressures of levelized cost of energy, and also the pressures around grid balancing, curtailment, particularly we're seeing in Ireland, or have been seeing in Ireland, and optimizing sort of the export onto the grid, really, in terms of the connection that you secure. And you know, at RSK, we're seeing quite a lot of that on sites, particularly in Scotland at the moment, but we're seeing it very much in Ireland with hydrogen more recently. And there's the concept of renewable energy development, where you're looking at not only just being a wind farm in isolation, but being proposed as a renewable park in a sense. We're seeing combinations of wind with solar, with battery, looking at hydrogen, maybe even looking at hydro. And if the communities are local enough, then maybe EV charging. And they all have various different sort of credibility about them. They're all on a bit of a spectrum in a way. But I think the future has to be these combinations. It is possible to do so. And I think in order to make these schemes more viable and to gain the maximum and optimize those exports onto the grid, then I think they're going to play a major part. And I suspect either through retrofitting to sites that are already a single technology, or through proposing combinations, then we're going to see a lot more of that.
I'm just going to jump in the end of that one, Mike, as well. The one thing that I suppose we're starting to see as well is I think anybody who is planning either a wind energy or solar or a single technology site at the minute needs to build that flexibility into their site plan to add a battery or to add hydrogen at a later date, even if you're not planning on doing it at the start. And you need to think about that now, because if you decide to try and do it because there's a government incentive in 2, 3, 5 years, and you want to capitalize on it at low cost, you're back into a whole new planning system again, and a planning application, and that can delay your ability to capitalize on a change in the market. So by at least thinking about that at that early stage and saying, I want to build a wind farm, but I might want to add something else, you've got to get that into your plan at the start, to be thinking that way, to give your asset the most adaptability and flexibility. And the other thing to finish off there, that I realize we're well over time here at this stage, but you know, what we see from RSK just across the board is that yes, there is complaining about the current planning system and time delays and backlogs. But that will change. There are regulations in place at the minute that you must follow. And if you're coming to the table with a half-hearted planning application and you haven't done your due diligence properly and you haven't done your surveys correctly, it doesn't matter how strategic that asset may be in terms of reaching 70% by 2030. If the planning application and the preparation isn't done right, it's still not going to get approved. So we have to get away from this concept of thinking that, yeah, they're going to pass this because they need the electricity. Somebody else with the right application could take that opportunity away from you if you're coming in half prepared. So that's probably my final point I would like to make on that is making sure that, you know, whatever application you're putting in or whatever preparation and surveys and engineering and environmental solutions, that whichever consultant you're engaging with, you need to make sure it's a proper solution as opposed to something that is just a copy and paste from another application. So on that note, I think we're at our time and I think we're out of questions there. So I would like to thank everybody again for dialing in this morning. We realize some of you have to get back to your Cyber Monday shopping. So thanks very much for taking the time out. Our contact details are on the screen. We will send you a survey out after, plus some supplementary information about RSK. Feel free to get in touch with any of the panelists with any questions or any additional queries about, you know, whether it be a particular project you're thinking about or a project you've been on. You know, the suite of services that we outlined at the start. Yes, we like to look at everything on a project, but we're happily sell those individual services if you need them to supplement a project you're on. I would like to take this opportunity again to thank Jane and Katie in the background who have been keeping the technology going for us. You know, we will be doing more more seminars in the new year. I would like to wish everybody, I know it's still November, but a happy Christmas, because I don't think I'm going into another webinar this side of the 25th of December. And I just, on a final environmental note, we would say stay safe and do responsible environmental shopping in the next 3 weeks. And the last thing is we're all working remotely today, as you can see, because that's in line with our RSK COVID policy and within the government guidelines at the minute is to work remotely where you can. So we're trying to do our best. We hope we can help you on a project coming sometime soon, and would like to thank you all again and have a good day. Thank you.